Kia ora everyone, Kiwi Modeler here. Today I'm going to be building this Forces of Valour's 1/72 scale F4U1-D Corsair. This is my first video of my channel, so I hope you enjoy. Now let's get started. So I'll take a look at the inside of the box first. So I purchased some Royal New Zealand Air Force markings. I'm going to be doing the top scheme. I have used these before, so I know they're fairly good quality. Here's the instructions. There's a little bit of information on the Corsair on the inside. And then the sprue map, which is always good to have, and the painting instructions. So they're actually, these instructions are very simple to follow. I think this kit is designed for more of a beginner, so if there's any beginners out there, you should take a look at it. So that's the instructions. Moving on to the sprues and the decals provided in the kit. So here are the decals provided in the kit. I'm not going to be using them there, as said, because I bought some New Zealand Air Force markings. Here's our first sprue. So we have two fuselage halves and the upper surfaces of the wings. So it looks pretty good quality, which is always good. Our next sprue here. So we have our propeller, landing gear, engine and cockpit parts here. Doesn't feel too greasy, so I don't think I'll need to give this kit a wash. Here's our third sprue here. So we have more parts of the landing gear and stuff. Here's the pilot. The pilot looks really comical actually. Like, he just like all bunched up together. It looks so comical. And our fourth sprue here. So this is the lower surfaces of the wings. So good quality as well, good detail. And landing gear area, the wheel wells I mean, they look really detailed, which is good. And our final sprue here. Had a little bit of trouble taking it out of the bag, but I didn't break anything, which is good. So on this sprue we have our drop tanks, wheels, stabilizers and landing gear doors. So all in all, looks to be a very good kit. So starting off with the assembly of the cockpit, so here I'm putting in the control stick. So I'm using Tamiya glue for this. Now I'll be putting in the pilot's seat, so I put a little bit of glue on the bottom of the seat and then stick that into the hole. So that's pretty much everything with the cockpit. It's not very detailed, but yeah. So now I'm going to be chipping the cockpit. So I'm using Vallejo aluminum and dry brushing that on all of the raised details on the cockpit. So like the seat and the foot pedals, and yeah, it's pretty much everything. So now I'm going to be using Ammo's black panel wash all over the cockpit just to pick out those details. So like the seat and the control stick and other raised details. So the kit doesn't have any seat belts in the cockpit, so I decided to add some of my own using some little cut up bits of masking tape. These are really fiddly to put on, but they really add some extra detail to that cockpit. So I'll start off with putting the lower seat belts on, so the ones that go around your waist. So that's the lower area put on. So for some reason they just did not want to lie flat, which was a bit annoying, but I eventually managed to get them to lie flat. Now I'm going to be putting the seat belts that go over the back of the chair, so the ones that go over your shoulders. So same process, just slow cut up bits of masking tape and putting them on. I also used a little bit of glue just to fix them in place. I did the same to the lower seat belts. So these ones were a bit easier to put on, but still very fiddly. And here's the cockpit with the seatbelts on. So now I'm about to start painting the seatbelt. So I'm using Tamiya Yellow Brown for this. I'm applying the paint using a toothpick instead of a paintbrush. I just find using a toothpick easier than a paintbrush. Like a paintbrush, even though you can get some really thin ones out there, you still have the chance of one of the hairs sticking out, and just like one small hair could ruin the entire thing. So yeah, I just like using a toothpick more, because it just has a finer tip sometimes, and also it's not going to have any bits sticking out of it. Now I'm going to paint the buckles on this seatbelt with a Vallejo aluminum, also using a toothpick again. Just pick out those little tips of the buckles, just to add that little bit of shine. It's just the small things that add the most detail in my opinion. So now I'm going to glue the cockpit into the side of one of the fuselages. I'd already painted the insides here with Vallejo US light green, and I'd weathered it and picked out those details using Vallejo aluminum, dry brushing it on. So now just make sure the seat belts stay down. Now I'm going to run some Tamiya glue all along the edges of the side of the fuselage and on those little bits that stick out, the connection points. And now gluing in the other half of the fuselage onto the connection points and everything. I'm just making sure everything's all tight and nothing's going to come apart. The fit is actually really good. I was very pleased with this. So I hadn't done any filling in this kit yet, so all the fitting was very good. Now lastly, for the cockpit assembly, I needed to glue in the control panel. So I started off by putting a little bit of glue in the area where the control panel is going to go. Then I tried putting the control panel in with some tweezers. This was really fiddly, and now looking back on it, I think I should have glued in the control panel first before I stuck the two fuselage halves together. So it was very fiddly progress, but eventually I managed to get the control panel in. And just add a little bit more glue just to seal it in. So there it is. It's pretty good so far. I'm putting glue onto the connection points on the lower half of the wings, and now time to glue the upper surfaces of the wings onto the lower halves, making sure everything is nice and tight. Here I'm just cleaning up all the excess glue with a cotton bud, and now time to put the other wing on. Doing the same process as I did the previous wing, make sure everything's all stuck on properly, and then I'm going to wipe away the excess with a cotton bud. So now it's time to glue the fuselage onto the wings. So I am putting a little bit of glue onto the raised parts and some of the other little bits on the lower part of the fuselage, which is attached onto the wings. Now gluing in the fuselage, so making sure everything lines up properly. It's actually a very good fit and very strong. And then just as a little bit of extra seal, I'm running some Tamiya extra thin cement along the areas where the wings connect to the fuselage, just to get that extra little bit of strength. Now I am painting the engine components with Tamiya Flat Black. Now I'm going to dry brush Vallejo aluminum over the raised surfaces on the engine, just to add that extra bit of shine to it. Now I am putting a little bit of glue onto the connection point of the engine, then gluing the other part of the engine onto that connection point, making sure everything is in the right spot and connected. Now putting a little bit of glue on the connection point for where the engine will go onto the fuselage. And then gluing the engine onto the fuselage, just making sure everything lines up properly. Final step for the engine assembly is putting a bit more glue onto the front of the engine and gluing in the little knob that sticks out where the propeller will go on. I'd already painted this with Vallejo Gull Grey, light gull grey. And there we go. So now I am going to be painting the green interior of the cockpit onto the clear parts. For some reason, whenever editing this video, the video for me masking and putting on the cockpit for whatever reason was corrupted, so unfortunately that wasn't there, but I used Humbrol liquid masco for the masking on this. So I'm just painting all of the raised details on the cockpit with Vallejo US light green, which is the same colour I painted the interior of the cockpit with. It's now time to start airbrushing the model, so I am painting it with Vallejo aluminum. The reason I'm doing this is because the chipping technique that I'm going to be using on this particular kit involves me giving the entire aircraft a base layer of silver, so that's what I'm doing here. The chipping technique I'm going to be doing on this particular kit is basically I am dipping a toothpick into some Humbrol masco and stippling it over all the areas that I think would get the most wear and tear, meaning where the paint would be chipped away most. So like the area where the pilot would be walking up to the cockpit, the area where the ground crew might be working on, so the guns, some of like little hatches and fuel areas, and around the moving parts, so flaps. It's now time to start painting the entire aircraft with Vallejo Dark Sea Blue, because the markings that I'm going to be doing for this particular kit have it that the entire thing should be painted with dark blue. So it's now time to start removing the Humbrol mascal. So I am rubbing some blue tack across all the areas where I've put the mascal, and it is removing the paint and showing the silver beneath. I'm also using a toothpick to chip away a few other scratches, just some smaller scratches where I believe they would go. Final bit of Humbrol mascal that I need to remove is the masking on the canopy, so I'm removing that with some tweezers and a toothpick. It's now time to start the weathering process. I'm starting off with the landing gear. So I'm going to be using an array of chalk pastel dust, some brown and grey chalk pastel dust, to create the desired effect. Because the aircraft that I am representing here is one that served in the Pacific, so I can imagine them being very dirty and beat up, so that is what I'm going to be doing here with this sort of effect. The final part of weathering for the landing gear is weathering the wheel wells. I'm doing the same process with the same mixture of chalk pastel dust, just stippling it into the wheel wells to create a very dirty, dusty effect. And now I can glue in the landing gear and jockey wheel. Unfortunately, when removing the jockey wheel from the sprue, the arrestor hook snapped, so I had the fiddly process of trying to put the arrestor hook in a position that looks authentic. I can now start applying the decals, so I'm putting a layer of Humbrol decal fix in the places where I want to put decals, and then sliding the decals off their backing paper onto that particular spot. I found these decals very easy to apply, and I did not have any issues with them. As I said at the beginning of the video, I have used these decals before, so I knew them to be very good. It's now time to start weathering the model, so I'm giving the whole aircraft a dark wash. This is usually to pick out the panel lines, but since the paint on this aircraft is already quite dark, this is more just to dull down the silver. Once the wash had dried, I began stippling on some light grey chalk pastel dust all over the wings, fuselage, and pretty much everywhere. Looking at some reference photos of Corsairs in the Pacific, I could see that these things were really beat up and really dirty, so I decided to replicate that using some chalk pastel dust. I used light grey because it would show up the most on the dark blue of the aircraft. The final bit of weathering I did to the Corsair was doing the same technique that I did to the upper surfaces by stippling a bunch of light grey chalk pastel dust all along the lower parts, the wings and fuselage. I also used a little mix of dark grey and reddish brown chalk pastel dust to represent the exhaust stains. Finally, I glued the propeller to the model, and I called this build of Forces of Valour's 1/72 scale F4U1-D Corsair complete. So, what did I think of this kit? Well, it's a very good model, probably the best one I've built in a while. It was very simple to put together, and I had no problems with fitting or filling in seams, which is good. The decals I used went on with no problems, and in the end, Forces of Valour produced a very nice, easy to build, simple model. I would highly recommend this Corsair build to any one, beginner or pro. The instructions are easy to follow, and in the end, produce a detailed, accurate representation of the Corsair. Now, before I finish this video, here's some information on the Corsair with the New Zealand Air Force. So the markings I used on this model are of an aircraft stationed at Los Negros Island in August 1945 with number 23 squadron named the Ghosts. This particular Corsair was named Kohimarama 9 after the suburb of Auckland City, and it was flown by Flying Officer Alex Daly. New Zealand was equipped with 424 Corsairs and used them from around 1944 to 48. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.